There's a pattern in history that has quietly transferred wealth from the many to the few over and over again without armies marching or governments collapsing overnight. In 16th century Spain, a flood of New World silver doubled prices by 1600 and hollowed out an empire that ruled half the globe. In 1923, Germany, prices rose so fast that a loaf of bread cost 200 billion marks, wiping out an entire middle class in months. In the 1970s United States, inflation peaked above 13%. Real wages fell for a decade, and savers paid the price for policy decisions they never voted on. Different centuries, different systems, same outcome. And right now in 2025, the modern global economy is following the exact same pattern. And here's what should terrify you. This time, it's happening everywhere at once. Before we go through this pattern, you need to understand what inflation actually means. Not in textbooks, in practice. It's not just rising prices. It's not just things getting more expensive. Inflation is a mechanism, a tool, a way value moves from one group to another without a single law explicitly saying it will happen. This isn't about groceries or gas. It's about who loses purchasing power and who gains leverage when money itself is quietly altered. At first, inflation feels manageable. Wages rise a little, asset prices rise faster. Governments call it temporary, central banks call it transitory. But then something shifts. The unit you measure your life in starts shrinking. Savings buy less. Salaries lag behind prices. Debts, meanwhile, become easier to repay. That's not an accident. That's the point. Here's what people don't understand. Inflation doesn't hit everyone equally. Those closest to the creation of new money feel it last. Those furthest away feel it first. By the time prices adjust for you, the transfer has already happened. Wealth has already moved. Quietly, legally, systematically. That's not theory. That's documented history. That's what happened to empires that thought they were expanding prosperity when they were really redistributing it. When inflation takes hold, it doesn't stay contained, it accelerates. And once it starts being used to solve structural problems, it becomes impossible to stop without consequences. Let me show you how this happened 3 times before and why it's happening again. Let's start with Spain at the height of its power. In 1492, Spain completed the Reconquista and funded Christopher Columbus's voyage across the Atlantic. By 1550, it controlled vast territories across Europe, the Americas, and Asia. It was the richest empire on earth, on paper. Silver and gold poured in from Potosi and Zacatecas. By 1600, Spain was importing an estimated 200 tons of silver per year. That metal became the backbone of the global economy, and it became the seed of Spain's decline. At first, the influx looked like prosperity. Between 1500 and 1550, Spain's money supply more than tripled. King Charles I and later King Philip II used the silver to fund wars across Europe, from the Netherlands to Italy. Soldiers were paid. Debts were serviced, but prices began to rise. By 1550, prices in Castile were roughly 3 times higher than they had been in 1500. Wages did not keep up. This was the beginning of the price revolution. Here's the critical detail. Spain didn't invest the silver into domestic production. Manufacturing declined. Agriculture stagnated. By 1560, Spain was importing grain, cloth, weapons, even basic tools. Silver flowed in. Goods flowed out. The economy became dependent on a single input. When money becomes easier than productivity, productivity disappears. By 1575, the effects were undeniable. Inflation was running at roughly 1.5 to 2% per year, which sounds small until you realize it compounded for decades. Over a lifetime, purchasing power was cut in half. Fixed incomes were destroyed. Nobles with land and debt survived. Merchants and laborers suffered. The silent transfer had begun. This is where the pattern truly begins. The crown needed more money. Wars were expensive. In 1588 alone, the Spanish Armada cost an estimated 10 million ducats. That's roughly $2 billion in today's terms. Taxes were raised. The Alcabala sales tax climbed above 10%, but taxes weren't enough, so Spain borrowed heavily. By 1596, Spain had declared bankruptcy 3 times. 1557, 1575, 1596. Each default wiped out creditors, mostly foreign bankers from Genoa and Antwerp. But domestically, the state survived. Why? Because inflation and debasement did the work. The silver content of the real declined. Coins were clipped. Copper coins, vellon, flooded the economy. More money, same goods, higher prices. By 1600, Spain was trapped. Silver shipments began to slow. Pirate attacks increased. Mines became less productive. But spending didn't stop. Inflation accelerated. Between 1600 and 1650, prices roughly doubled again. Real wages fell by an estimated 30%. The middle class shrank. This wasn't sudden collapse, it was erosion. Here's where it gets worse. As inflation hollowed out domestic industry, Spain lost competitiveness. Other nations noticed. The Dutch Republic invested in shipbuilding and trade. England invested in manufacturing. Spain imported both. By 1620, Spain ran chronic trade deficits. Silver came in and immediately left. That meant more money chasing fewer domestic goods. The crown responded the only way it could, more debasement. In 1628, copper coin issuance exploded. The money supply surged again. Prices spiked. Confidence collapsed. People hoarded silver and gold. Bad money drove out good money. Gresham's law in real time. By 1640, Spain faced revolts in Catalonia and Portugal. The economy couldn't support the military. The tax base had collapsed. Inflation had already done the damage. The empire didn't fall in a single year. It withered. By 1650, Spain was no longer the dominant power in Europe. By 1700, it was a second-rate state. This entire process took about 150 years. No invasion destroyed Spain, no single decision. Inflation acted as a silent wealth transfer, from workers to debtors, from the productive to the political, from the future to the present. That's what inflation looks like when it's used to paper over structural weakness. Let's jump forward more than 3 centuries. Germany after World War I. In 1918, the German Empire collapsed. The Kaiser abdicated. The country was exhausted, defeated, and financially broken. But what followed wasn't just political chaos. It was one of the most extreme examples of inflation ever recorded. And just like Spain, it began with a problem leaders believed they could manage. In 1919, the Treaty of Versailles imposed reparations totaling 132 billion gold marks. That was roughly 3 times Germany's annual economic output. The Weimar government faced a choice: raise taxes dramatically in a devastated economy, or finance obligations another way. They chose the second option. By 1921, Germany suspended the gold standard. Money creation replaced taxation. At first, it didn't look catastrophic. Prices rose, but employment remained high. Exports became cheaper. Industrialists benefited. Just like Spain's early silver years, inflation felt like relief. In 1920, $1 equaled 64 marks. By the end of 1921, it was 190 marks. Painful, but survivable. Just like case number 1, this is where the pattern quietly locked in. Government spending increased, welfare payments expanded, deficits grew, and instead of reversing course, the Reichsbank accelerated printing. By mid-1922, the money supply had increased by more than 400% compared to 1913. Prices followed. Here's what people don't understand. Inflation didn't hit everyone equally. Industrialists with access to credit repaid loans with cheaper money. Exporters thrived. Those on fixed incomes were destroyed. Teachers, civil servants, retirees. Sound familiar? By January 1923, $1 equaled 17,000 marks. Just like Spain, confidence collapsed before the state did. People stopped trusting money. Barter returned. Farmers refused paper currency. Urban centers starved. Savings accumulated over decades vanished in months. This wasn't just inflation. This was the complete liquidation of the middle class. Notice the pattern. Stage 1, an unpayable obligation. Stage 2, money creation to delay pain. Stage 3, asset holders protected, wage earners sacrificed. The same trap that caught Spain was closing again. And just like Spain's coin debasement, Germany debased trust itself. By August 1923, the Reichsbank printed notes with denominations of 100 trillion marks. Ink shortages became a problem. That's not metaphorical, it's documented history. But here's the critical comparison. Spain's collapse took generations. Germany's took years. From manageable inflation in 1919 to total monetary breakdown in 1923. 4 years. The pattern was accelerating. The political consequences followed immediately. Extremism surged. In November 1923, Adolf Hitler attempted the beer hall putsch. It failed. But the conditions that made it possible were created by inflation. People who lose everything look for someone to blame. The crisis only ended when confidence was forcibly restored. In November 1923, Germany introduced the Rentenmark. 1 Rentenmark equaled 1 trillion old marks. Money printing stopped overnight. Inflation collapsed just as fast as it had exploded. The economy stabilized, but the damage was permanent. Just like Spain, Germany never fully recovered its social fabric. The middle class was gone. Trust in institutions was shattered. And when the Great Depression hit in 1929, the system had no resilience left. The same country that had experienced hyperinflation a decade earlier would soon experience mass unemployment and authoritarian rule. Different century, different continent, identical collapse mechanics. Inflation wasn't just a symptom, it was the mechanism, a silent wealth transfer that rewired society from the inside. The pattern had played out again. Now let's look at the most recent example, one you probably remember, or at least one your parents do, the Soviet Union. In its final decade, because this time the pattern didn't take centuries, it didn't even take decades, it accelerated, and it collapsed faster than almost anyone expected. By 1980, the Soviet Union controlled territory spanning 11 time zones. It commanded the world's largest standing army. It possessed nuclear parity with the United States. On the surface, it looked permanent. But underneath, the system was already breaking. The Soviet economy was structurally inefficient. Central planning suppressed prices, masked shortages, and destroyed incentives. By the late 1970s, productivity growth had fallen below 1% per year. Oil exports covered the gap. In 1981, oil and gas accounted for more than 60% of hard currency earnings. That worked as long as oil prices stayed high. Then the external shock hit. Between 1981 and 1986, global oil prices fell by nearly 70%. Soviet export revenues collapsed. The state suddenly faced the same dilemma Spain and Germany had faced before. Cut spending and accept pain, or print and delay. They chose delay. Here's the critical detail. Officially, the Soviet Union claimed inflation didn't exist. Prices were fixed. But inflation doesn't disappear when you ban the word. It goes underground. By 1985, shortages were everywhere. Empty shelves, long lines. Ration cards returning. Money still existed. Goods didn't. When Mikhail Gorbachev came to power in March 1985, he inherited a system already in slow-motion failure. His reforms, perestroika and glasnost, were meant to modernize. Instead, they exposed the rot. State enterprises were given more autonomy, but no real market pricing. Output fell, losses rose. The state covered the gap. Between 1986 and 1990, the Soviet budget deficit exploded. In 1985, it was roughly 2% of GDP. By 1990, estimates place it above 10%. The money supply followed. Cash in circulation more than doubled in 5 years. But prices stayed fixed, so shortages intensified. Just like Germany in 1922, this is where acceleration begins. People stopped trusting official prices. Black markets exploded. By 1989, an estimated 30% of consumer goods were traded unofficially at prices several times higher than state levels. Two economies existed at once, one fictional, one real. By 1990, the state was losing control. Enterprises paid workers even when they produced nothing. Wages rose without output. This is inflation in its purest form. More money, fewer goods. The silent transfer was now brutal. Those with access to goods, connections, or foreign currency survived. Everyone else watched their purchasing power vanish. Here's what should really concern you. The collapse happened faster than anyone predicted. In January 1991, prices were partially liberalized. Within months, inflation exploded. By the end of 1991, prices had risen more than 160%. In 1992, after the Soviet Union formally dissolved in December 1991, inflation in Russia alone exceeded 2,500%. Compare the timelines. Spain took roughly 150 years to lose dominance. Germany took 4 years to destroy its currency. The Soviet system went from denial to total collapse in less than 6 years. The pattern wasn't changing. It was speeding up. Savings were wiped out almost overnight. Bank deposits accumulated over lifetimes became worthless. Pensions collapsed. Life expectancy fell. Between 1990 and 1994, male life expectancy in Russia dropped by nearly 6 years. That's not an abstract statistic. That's societal trauma. And just like the previous cases, a new elite emerged. Those who controlled assets during the chaos acquired them for pennies. Factories, oil fields, infrastructure. Inflation and monetary collapse didn't eliminate wealth. They redistributed it violently upward. By December 26, 1991, the Soviet Union ceased to exist. No invasion, no decisive battle. The system imploded under the weight of its own distortions. Inflation wasn't the only cause, but it was the accelerant, the mechanism that turned structural weakness into irreversible collapse. 3 times, 3 systems, 3 complete breakdowns, different ideologies, different currencies, the exact same sequence. And here's what should terrify you. The modern global economy, led by the United States, is following the exact same pattern, stage by stage, not approximately, not metaphorically, mechanically. Stage 1 is structural imbalance. The United States has been running persistent deficits for decades. In fiscal year 2000, total federal debt was $5.7 trillion. By 2010, it was $13.5 trillion. By 2020, $26.9 trillion. By late 2024, it crossed $36 trillion. That's not cyclical, that's exponential. Check. Stage 2 is the normalization of money creation to cover that imbalance. After the 2008 financial crisis, the Federal Reserve expanded its balance sheet from under $1 trillion to over $4.5 trillion by 2014. After March 2020, it exploded again. In just 24 months, more than $4 trillion was created. That's more than the previous 2 centuries combined. Check. Stage 3 is the claim that this time is different. Officials said inflation was transitory in 2021. By June 2022, CPI inflation hit 9.1%, the highest level since 1981. Real wages fell for 25 consecutive months. Savings lost purchasing power. Asset owners didn't. Just like Spain, just like Germany. Check. Stage 4 is uneven impact. Since 2020, the top 10% of households own roughly 90% of stocks. Housing prices rose more than 40% nationally between 2020 and 2023. Rent followed. Meanwhile, median real wages barely moved. Inflation acted exactly as designed. Quietly, legally, upward. Check. Stage 5 is debt monetization. In 2024 alone, the U.S. government paid over $1 trillion in interest on its debt. That's more than defense spending. The only way that remains manageable is if inflation erodes the real value of what's owed. This is the silent deal. Savers pay, debtors benefit. Check. Stage 6 is confidence erosion. In 2000, foreign entities held about 60% of U.S. treasuries. By 2024, that number had fallen below 40%. Countries like China reduced holdings by hundreds of billions of dollars. Alternatives emerged. Bilateral trade in non-dollar currencies expanded. BRICS discussed settlement systems. This doesn't collapse overnight. It leaks. Check. We're not approaching the pattern. We're deep inside it. Look at the symptoms. Grocery prices up more than 25% since 2020. Insurance premiums rising double digits. Energy volatility. Credit card interest rates above 20%. Meanwhile, asset markets remain historically elevated. That divergence is the signal. That's Spain importing everything. That's Germany protecting industrialists. That's Soviet insiders accessing goods. Stage 7 is political pressure. Inflation becomes the dominant issue in elections. Populism rises on both sides. Trust in institutions falls. In 1964, trust in U.S. government exceeded 70%. By 2024, it hovered around 20%. When money stops working, belief systems follow. Check. So where are we in the sequence? Late stage? Not final collapse, but late. The next stage historically is escalation, either higher inflation, financial repression, or both. That means controlled rates below inflation, capital controls by another name, limited exits. This happened in Britain after World War II, in the US during the 1940s, in dozens of countries since. After that comes the reckoning. Maybe 5 years, maybe 10, maybe less. Spain took generations, Germany took 4, the Soviet system took 6. The pattern is accelerating because money now moves at digital speed. And here's the part that makes it personal. Your cash savings lose value every year. Inflation runs above interest rates. Your wages lag prices by design. Your retirement depends on asset inflation continuing. This isn't abstract. It's arithmetic. When inflation is used as a silent wealth transfer, it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't vote. It doesn't ask permission. It just compounds quietly. And every empire that reaches this stage tells itself the same story. Exceptionalism. Innovation. Control. Every empire believes it can manage the math. The pattern says otherwise. 3 times this mechanism played out in full view of history. Spain, Germany, the Soviet Union. Each faced obligations they could not meet through growth or taxation alone. Each turned to the same solution: alter the money, delay the pain, transfer the cost quietly, and each believed they were exceptional. Each believed their power, their ideology, or their institutions made them different. Each believed the rules would bend for them. They were wrong, every single time. The pattern is brutally consistent. Inflation begins as a policy choice. It becomes a habit. Then it becomes a necessity. By the time leaders admit it's a problem, the transfer has already happened. Savers are poor. Debtors are richer. Asset holders are protected. Workers are exposed. The middle class absorbs the shock. History doesn't record this as theft. It records it as economic adjustment. We're telling ourselves the same lies right now. That deficits don't matter. That debt can grow forever. That technology changes the rules. That central banks can fine-tune reality. But the pattern doesn't care about narratives. It doesn't care about elections. It doesn't care about intentions. The pattern is mathematical. You cannot create money faster than goods without consequences. You cannot erode purchasing power without social cost. You cannot complete every stage of this sequence and simply stop at the edge. Maybe we have 10 years, maybe 5, maybe less. Since 2020, every stage has accelerated. Money creation, asset inflation, political polarization, confidence erosion. What once took generations now takes years. Maybe this time really is different. Maybe the modern system finds a way out that Spain couldn't, that Germany didn't, that the Soviet Union never saw. Maybe. But the pattern says otherwise. The math says otherwise. And history says we're about to learn the same lesson again, just at digital speed. If understanding where we actually are in this sequence changed how you see the world, stay here. Because when the next stages unfold, the answers won't be hiding in the future. They're written in the past, in the ruins of empires that believed they were immune, and I'll show you where to look.